Varsity Club, welcome back to another classic. There's been a ton of talk all of a sudden about Deebo Samuel not being happy with San Francisco, and he's formally requested a trade. Everyone knows about Deebo Samuel because he was pretty much the #1 player talked about that wasn't a quarterback last season because of his usage at receiver and at running back. But thanks to a really great tweet from Cynthia Freeland, we learned from Next Gen Stats, Deebo Samuel aligned in the backfield on more than 21.1% of snaps starting in week 10 of last season. He aligned in the backfield only 2.1% of the snaps in his first 33 career games. That's literally a 10x increase. And then even more so, he went from averaging 6.1 receptions per game for the 49ers in their first 8 games of the 2021 season to 3.5 in their last 11, including the playoffs. I can understand maybe why he's mad. Now, Deebo has come out and said that it's not about the actual money, it's about other things, and we can just assume the other things are really he doesn't want to be used as a running back, he wants to be a receiver, because we all know running backs, they don't last too long. So in today's video, leave a thumbs up if you're excited for this, and we're gonna be taking 5 different teams and trading Deebo to those 5 different teams and seeing how his career ultimately pans out. Because with the trade rumors hot and heavy right now, we want to see, okay, of these 5 teams that are sort of rumored for him, which one is the best fit and which one honestly would he do the best with? Let's find out. Now, for the sake of this video, keep in mind that we can't actually have as many draft picks as would probably be happening out there. If you use the Tyreek Hill trade for sort of a model of what's going on, they ended up having 5 total draft picks. I'm not saying Deebo's worth 5 draft picks or isn't worth more or whatever. You can argue that in the comments if you want, but I'm just saying we can only use 3 draft picks in Madden. So in order for me to be probably the most fair I can possibly be, what we're going to be doing is trading for each of these teams that we work with a first-round pick this year, a first-round pick next year, and then a second-round pick in the following draft. That to me will be a baseline. They all have the same compensation removed from them. It's not, oh, you should have traded for this player, that player, whatever. They're all on the same trade baseline, and then we'll see how Deebo does with each team. So for the Jets, who desperately need a big-time receiver, they're getting Deebo Samuel for their first-round pick this year, a first-round pick next year, and a second-round pick next year as well. And so with that, Deebo becomes the #1 player on the Jets roster from a rating standpoint. Again, this is a dude that is highly usable in both the passing and the running game, but ultimately it sounds like he wants to be more in the receiving game. So as a reminder, we're going to sim an entire season with Deebo Samuel as a part of the Jets. We're going to record his stats, and then we'll compare them over the course of this video with the other 5 teams to see ultimately where he ranks and what the best fit for him is. So Deebo's year for the Jets ends up being interesting. They end up winning 4 more games than won in 2021, but they still miss out in the playoffs, being 8-9 on the year. Deebo gets 62 grabs for 769 yards, 5 touchdowns, but again, not really a stellar season for him. His second best season, you could probably argue, overall. And in the running game, though, I guess the good news for him is he only ran twice for 3 yards. So I guess he got his wish not to run the football as much. Up next for Deebo Samuel will be the Baltimore Ravens. So we have their first rounder this year, the first rounder next year, and a second rounder in 2023. Same as before. So now Deebo becomes the top-rated receiver for the Baltimore Ravens, gives Lamar Jackson a true #1 and a weapon that can be used in an insane level. Maybe not to the degree that it was used in San Fran, but still, they can do a lot of different things with Deebo in Baltimore. Now, Deebo ends up going up 2 overall. He started the season at 88. He actually goes up to a 90 overall for this with a +2 morale boost. But what did his stats ultimately look like? Deebo has honestly a pretty good year, the highest touchdowns he's ever had in his career, actually getting more touchdowns in one season than he's ever had before. But he only gets 70 receptions, second for his career, 944 yards, again, second for his career, but 11 touchdowns. This is a significantly better season than what he had with the Jets, but how did the team do? So when you look at the actual NFL standings, the Cowboys have the best record, but the Ravens literally have the second best record in all of football. I'd say this is a W. Lamar has probably his best season ever as a pro, throwing for 42 touchdowns, I believe the most in his NFL career. Not as many yards as I believe he's thrown before, but 42 touchdowns and 7 interceptions with Deebo, you gotta love it. And I think something to cover we didn't actually mention is that Deebo literally ran 0 times, so I think he got his way. He finished second to the team to Mark Andrews, who had 91 grabs for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, but again, he led the team in touchdowns, which is probably what the dude cares about right now. Unfortunately for the Ravens, they end up losing to the Raiders in postseason by 6 points. They tried to come back, they had a late run in the second half, but ultimately it just wasn't enough to beat the Raiders, who got on honestly a pretty good early start. If we want to see how Deebo actually did, we can check the receiving side. Mark Andrews had 10 grabs for 139 and 2, but Deebo is down here with 8 for 86 and 1 touchdown. It's honestly not a bad game, and I would consider, despite the early playoff exit, this is still a pretty good season for him. The third team we're going to test for Deebo Samuel will be the Green Bay Packers, who obviously just lost a massive hole on their team in Devontae Adams. Now they get a chance to possibly plug that with Deebo Samuel. So their first round this year, first round next year, and a second round next year as well. Now Deebo on the Packers is going to be interesting, pairing him with Aaron Rodgers. Even though it's a later in Rodgers' career, it should be absolutely terrifying for NFL defenses. But I will note that he ends up getting hurt in the preseason in this simulation, so he's out for 1 week, but then he should be pretty much good to go immediately after that. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, my favorite team, get the best record in the NFL. If we look to see where the Packers are, it's the 4th best record in the league, sitting at 11-6. Deebo Samuel, similar to what his time was in Baltimore, ends up going up +2 for his morale boost, so he's a 90 overall at this point. We check his actual stats, we can see that he had 82 grabs, the most he's had by far in his career, 1,100 yards, second most of his career, but only 7 receiving touchdowns. But again, I guess Rodgers is probably spreading it around. And on the ground, he runs it 0 times. So again, he's probably pretty happy about that. We do find out, though, that Deebo has a severe concussion and he's out for 2 weeks, so we won't see him in the wild card round. If they make it past the wild card round, then he won't be playing in that either. Now, fortunately for Deebo, the Packers ended up beating the Seahawks by 2 points to make it past the wild card round, but the divisional round will be a little bit more tough. And even though in this universe, Kyler Murray did finally sign a long-term contract, I say his team ends up losing and the Packers win by 4 in a very, very close game. But in the game that Deebo Samuel comes back, they end up playing the Dallas Cowboys and they get absolutely torched. Like, it's not even close, 29-6. If we check the receiving stats, Deebo ended up leading everybody with 7 grabs, 101 yards, didn't get in the end zone any, but he absolutely dominated from when he was actually on the field. It's just his team couldn't get in the end zone and they lost. The second to last team we'll be using will be the Dallas Cowboys, and just like the previous teams, a first rounder this year, a first rounder next year, and then a second round pick in the following draft. Look, if some team doesn't have a first round pick in real life, just imagine we're using their next first round draft. Okay, 2 firsts and a second is how we're doing it. So Deebo was set to fit in honestly pretty well in Dallas. He's rocking number 19, which is what another wide receiver who just wore in Dallas wore, and then he got sent out, but still he's got his number. And honestly, this Dallas wide receiver core is poised for some great things. They have Deebo at 1, CeeDee Lamb at number 2, Michael Gallup at number 3, and Will Fuller at 4. This is a super talented team who also got James Washington and a couple other guys out there. I mean, Dak has a ton of people to throw to. So despite a pretty loaded roster, the Dallas Cowboys are nowhere near the top right now. The Chargers, Bucks, and Raiders are sitting in the top. And if you want to find your beloved Cowboys, well, they're at 8 and 9. They kind of struggled but barely squeaked in the last spot. Oh, and should I mention they just barely beat out the 49ers? They got to be a little angry. So it definitely seems like Dallas didn't gel as super well in comparison to what we've seen for previous teams for Deebo, but I want to see what he ultimately saw here from his standings, from a statistical standpoint. So 73 receptions, second in his career, 941 yards, just missing that 1,000-yard mark. 5 receiving touchdowns would be second in his career as well. So it's an okay season, but again, not his best. He ended up running the ball twice in Dallas, but again, that's a far cry from what he'd been doing in the previous years, so I'm sure he's okay with that. When we look to see how the Cowboys ultimately did in the very first round of the playoffs, the wild card round, they ended up losing by 6 points to a very talented 12-5 Arizona Cardinals team. We see Dak throws for 300+ yards. If we go in to see what Deebo did, 8 grabs, 98 yards, and 1 touchdown. Honestly, not a terrible game, but probably not the end of the season that he had envisioned. And the 5th and final team we're going to experiment with will be the Kansas City Chiefs. Get like a first this year, first next year, and a second round pick next year as well. Look, they lost Tyreek Hill, who is a sizable guy to end up losing for your team and your offense. And I'm not saying that Deebo ends up replacing him exactly, but he can fit a need that the Chiefs definitely need at receiver. So we get our first look at Deebo Samuel in Kansas City, and God bless America, with Andy Reid and obviously Patrick Mahomes is a super scary player to have in this team. But let's see how he does in his year with them. Now, Deebo's year with the Chiefs ultimately wraps up, and you can see the Ravens, Panthers, and Broncos have your top records in the league. But where are the Chiefs? Well, the Chiefs are ultimately going to be pretty far down here, which means they're not in the postseason. Deebo goes up slightly, so he probably had a pretty decent year. Goes up to a 90 overall with a morale boost and everything. But what do his stats actually say for him? 60 grabs, 865 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I wouldn't really call this a banner year, especially when you pair him with Patrick Mahomes, who we thought would just have incredible stuff. But I assume he got #1 coverage the entire time. And just because you have Juju Smith-Schuster doing TikTok dances beside you, doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be open, I guess. So my thing what this ultimately means is that for Deebo, the Chiefs aren't really the move. The Jets aren't really the move. You can argue the Cowboys probably aren't the move either. Based off what Madden is telling us and what the situations are, because these are pretty updated rosters thanks to the modded version of Madden, it looks like the best options for him would be either the Ravens or basically the Packers. I mean, with the Packers, we're talking 82 receptions for 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. With the Ravens, we're talking 70 receptions, 944 yards, and 11 touchdowns. But they lost in the divisional round, where the Packers lost in the NFC Championship round. Neither team or any team really didn't bring him a championship aspiration like I'm sure he hopes, but still, he had some pretty good years overall. But enough of what I think and enough of what Madden thinks. What do you think about where Deebo Samuel should go? You tell me an NFL team in the comments down below. I'll reply to some of those and we'll see maybe where in the next couple of days Deebo Samuel ultimately ends up. Be safe, be smart, tell somebody you love them. Catch you guys in the next one.